The topic of today's talk is the Jesuit Mysore mission. I'm sure as Jesuits, you must have at least heard something about the Jesuit Mysore mission. Okay, the Jesuit Mysore mission existed in the Kingdom of Mysore from 1648 to 1773. You know the significance of the year 1773, the suppression of the Society of Jesus. The Mysore mission followed the evangelization method of accommodation that was practiced in the Madurai mission started by Robert de Nobili. And the Mysore mission is one of the three South Indian inland missions, not coastal missions, but inland missions or interior missions, along with the Madurai mission and the Carnatic mission. And many think that since the Mysore mission also followed the adaptation method of Robert de Nobili, they think that Mysore mission is a replica of Madurai mission, which is not exactly true. Because Mysore mission is younger to Madurai mission by more than 40 years. More than after 40 years of Madurai mission, Mysore mission was started. And several initial practices or trials that were attempted in Madurai mission by Robert de Nobili underwent a lot of crisis, lot of criticism, and they were given up in Madurai mission by the time Mysore mission was started. Therefore, when Mysore mission started, it did not experiment all over again all the principles of Robert de Nobili. On the other hand, in Mysore mission, the Jesuit missionaries followed a modified method of Madurai mission or Robert de Nobili. Okay, and we know that in the 17th century, the Indian evangelization was carried out by the Padroado system. I don't want to explain what is Padroado system. In short, it is evangelization by the Portuguese. Therefore, the missions of the Portuguese from the 16th century onwards, from 1510 onwards, were confined largely to the coastal areas. And because only in the coastal areas the Portuguese had political influence, and the evangelization meant Europeanization. That means the Indians who got converted to Christianity were supposed to almost become like Europeans, like having European name, European surname, and also the food habits, the dress, etc. In short, it is the tabula rasa method, which we have studied in philosophy. That means give up all the Indian rituals and Indian practices, and you become a European. That was the evangelization method started, and we can see that policy being followed in the coastal mission areas. For example, Goa, Canara, Malabar, Travancore coast, and coming to the eastern side, the Pearl Fishery coast, and also Bengal coast. Bengal was under the Augustinians; it was not under the Jesuits. But in all the other places like Goa, Canara, Malabar, Travancore, Pearl Fishery, the Jesuits had a very strong influence, where the Europeanization method was followed. But this method did not work well in the interiors, in the inlands, where the Portuguese did not have political influence. That was because in the interiors, the Portuguese were considered as Parangis. I don't want to explain this term Parangi in a large manner, but it meant that the Portuguese were known as Parangis because they were consuming liquor and they were eating beef. Therefore, Parangi meant being a low caste in India. And also becoming a Christian means becoming a Parangi or adopting to a Parangi religion. And because of that, the missionaries did not have much influence or much success, much harvest in the interiors. Therefore, they wanted to circumvent this problem by undertaking a method of accommodation or adaptation. At the time it was called, today what we would call as inculturation. But this accommodation was already a possibility in the mid 16th century, where the Portuguese power was not very strong. The missionaries could resort to this method, and it also worked well with the Jesuit spirituality of finding God in all things. And in fact, Ignatius himself had said that in order to make the other person come out of the house, you enter the door of the other person, or enter the door of the other in order to make him come out of the house. With this principle, the Madurai mission was started in the beginning of the 17th century by Robert de Nobili. I just want to give a small introduction about Madurai mission, because the Mysore mission followed the method of Madurai mission. Robert de Nobili reached Madurai in the year 1606, and in 6 months he learned Sentamil, that is the literary Tamil. And he dressed himself like a sannyasi, eating vegetarian meal, and prepared meticulously by his Brahmin cook. And he built for himself a small hut in the Brahmin quarters of the city. And he began to say that I have come to preach a Satya Veda, a Veda that was lost, a new Veda, that is a Satya Veda. And he began to tell that Christianity is not connected with any caste or any clan or something. Therefore, when you receive baptism, you are not losing your caste. Instead, you are retaining your caste. And he also said that I am not a Parangi. He made use of the fact that he was not from Portugal, but he was from Italy. So he said that I am not a Parangi, but I am a Roman Raja. So I belong to a Kshatriya caste. I am not a Parangi, therefore. So in this way, he attracted several people, and people began to accept Christianity because they did not have the fear of being thrown out of the caste. These are some of the images of Robert de Nobili. And he also introduced a Christianity that was more of an Indian Christianity. He gave legitimate concession to his converts. For example, they could apply the sandal paste on their forehead like the Hindus, or also they could have the kudumi, or the tuft of long hair on their head. And like the other Brahmins, they could have their ceremonial baths, and they could wear their punul, or the Brahminical thread, etc. And also they had a separate place in the church for the Brahmins, one place, and for the outcasts another place, etc. And also the sacraments were distributed to the high castes first, and afterwards the lower section of the society. But whatever was strictly Hindu practice, the Nobili rejected. And he also Christianized several blessings, prayers, and marriage ceremonies, burial ceremonies. For example, the celebration of Pongal was all started by him. But the problem was, from the year 1610 onwards, his method was opposed by his own Jesuit confreres, Gonzalo Fernandez. He found fault with him, and the Franciscans and diocesanes also accused Robert de Nobili. And in fact, some said that de Nobili had become a Hindu. He had apostatized the Christian religion. And also some of his own converts rebelled against him. And in the year 1612, the provincial of Malabar province forbade him to baptize, but the ban was lifted only in the year 1616. But that ban really affected the work of evangelization of Robert de Nobili. But also the matter went to the Inquisition in Goa, where the Archbishop of Goa, Dominicans, and the Franciscans and the diocesanes were against Robert de Nobili. But the Archbishop of Cranganore, who was a Jesuit, strongly supported the method of de Nobili, and also the Jesuits in Goa also supported the method of de Nobili. Finally, the matter went to Portugal, Lisbon, and in the year 1621, the Grand Inquisitor of Portugal gave the verdict in favor of Robert de Nobili and allowed him to follow his method. And in the year 1623, Pope Gregory XV gave the verdict in favor of Robert de Nobili and allowed him to practice his Roman sannyasi method. But this Brahmin sannyasi method or the Roman sannyasi model that Robert the Nobili introduced in Madurai was successful only in the city of Madurai, where the people were learned and the people were all from respectable classes. But in the faraway places, in the places away from Madurai, it did not work out well because the people were not very much educated. Because of that, they had to go towards the lower caste of the society. For that, they introduced another section or another type of missionaries called Pandara Swamis, who were not sannyasis. But these Pandara Swamis began to reap more harvest. And they became more popular because people were getting converted among these Pandara Swamis from the lower caste of the society. Because of this, slowly the lower caste of conversions took over the higher caste Christians. And from the year 1640 onwards, this sannyasi model was slowly declining already in Madurai. And by the year 1673, this sannyasi method was almost given up in Madurai mission. It is in this context that the Mysore mission was started. Now we come to the Mysore mission. The Jesuit Mysore mission was started by an Italian Jesuit called Leonardo Cinami. He was born in Naples in the year 1609 and entered the novitiate in Naples in the year 1623. Already in Italy, he was known for his poetical and literary skills. He was a great orator and he wrote several dramas which became very famous. He was very much involved in theater, etc. And in the year 1636, he was ordained a priest. And in 1643, he took his final vows. But from the beginning onwards, he was very much interested in the missions. He wrote several letters to the general expressing his willingness to go to the missions. Finally, he was sent to India. He reached India, and for 2 years, he was working in Salset. And afterwards, for 2 more years, he worked in Canara Mission. In 1647, he was in Honnavar, and in 1648, he came to Chandur, both under the Ikeri kingdom. But here he did not have much success. Once again, because he was considered as a Portuguese, a Parangi, and the people were very, in Canara coast, were familiar with the Portuguese and their religion. Therefore, he wanted to go to the interiors. We can ask what influenced him to go to the interiors. Already, when he was in Honnavar and Chandur, his co-missionary who was with him in Honnavar and Chandur, Antonio Correa, already was attempting to go into the interiors, and in the year 1647, he went as far as Shimoga. And he found a lot of people getting interested in his preaching and willingness to become Christians. Probably that also made Chinami to leave the coast and venture into the interiors. The place that he chose was the Mysore kingdom. Therefore, in the year 1649, he dressed himself as a Brahmin sannyasi and reached Srirangapatana. And there he began to preach the people that I have brought the Satyaveda. This Satyaveda is not contrary to the Vedas that you believe, but it is the new Veda that I have brought. This Satyaveda consists in adoring one God in 3 persons, that is Trimurti. So in this way, following the method of Robert de Nobili, Chinami also began to preach Christianity in Srirangapatana. This was the method that he used in Srirangapatana, where he got significant conversions in the capital from the learned class and high caste of the city. But the most commonly used method in Mysore mission was not the method that Chinami followed in Srirangapattanam. In the faraway places away from Srirangapattanam, they were making use of the medicines that they were having, and also the lot of conversions took place because of casting out of devils and the exorcism, etc. And also the sick were brought to the missionaries, and by praying over them, by blessing them with holy water, with the use of medals, relics, and sacred ash, etc., they were able to bring healing to the people, and because of that several people got converted to Christianity in faraway places, the places I will mention little later. Also we have instances of parents bringing their children for baptism when they were sick. They themselves did not receive baptism, but they used to give baptism to the children, believing that baptism will be a cure for the illness of the children. And many thought that becoming a Christian gave some sort of immunity or protection from evil influences, from devil, from evil spells, or from black magic, etc., etc. And because of that, though they did not become Christians, they began to use the medals that were given by the missionaries. They used to take the holy water from them, and also they used to smear the sacred ash or make use of the relics and the crucifixes or the crosses, etc. We find constantly being mentioned in the Jesuit letters about these practices. So the first headquarters was Sri Rangapatana. But there were also several other Christian communities, and these Christian communities, or the sub headquarters, were called as residences, a mission station where a Jesuit missionary resided, who had the care of the surrounding Christian communities and the surrounding villages, etc. So several Christian communities emerged in the 17th century. But in the 17th century, Christianity spread mostly to the east of Sri Rangapatana, especially the places bordering Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, the Kollegal area, and also the adjoining Tamil Nadu areas like Dharmapuri, Salem, etc. So the first residence was Sri Rangapatana, and that also was the headquarters of the mission. But within 2-3 years, other mission stations or residences emerged at places like Basavapura. Basavapura is in Kollegal Taluk near Hanur Bandali. Near Bandali is that Basavapura is there, where even today that one Jesuit tomb is there, Spinola. Then Martelli is at the foot of Yamam Hills. Then Navalpatti and Sambali are in present day Tamil Nadu. Dharmapuri became a Christian center of Mysore mission in the year 1666, and also Harobale, another important center which even today has a vibrant Christianity, that began to have Christians from the year 1660 onwards. By the year 1664, there were 800 Christians in the mission with just 3 Jesuits. But from 1665 onwards, the number of missionaries increased, and in 1674, the mission had nearly 2,490 Christians. And at that time, the mission extended from Periyapatna in the west till Vaniambadi in the east, and from Kottagal, that is near Kanagapura, in the north, to Minya in the south, that is Minya is near Ramapura in Kollegal Taluk. And in the year 1886, there were around 30,000 Christians in Mysore mission. This is the map of Mysore mission. What you see in green is the original Mysore mission. You can see the residences, Sri Rangapatana, and we have Kanagapura. Below Kanagapura, we have Harobale, and below Harobale, we have Basavapura, and below Basavapura, we can see Martelli. And to the left of, below left of Martelli, you can see Minya. These are the places in present day Karnataka. But the Mysore mission at that time also extended to the parts of Tamil Nadu, where places like Hosur, Kelamangala, Denganikote, Marandavalli, Pennagaram, Dharmapuri, Samballi, Navalpatti, they were all important centers of the Mysore mission of the Jesuits at that time. But what you see in red is originally the territory originally belonging to the Madurai mission, but in the year 1885, it was added to the Mysore mission. That I will mention a little later. The kings were very magnanimous towards the Jesuit missionaries. Narasaraja Odayar, in fact, promised to build a house, and he promised to give a grant of village to Chinnami, and he also prevented a lot of persecutions of the missionaries and the Christians. And his successor, Doddadevaraj Odayar, was more favorable than Narasaraja Odayar. And in fact, during Doddadevaraj Odayar's time, the residence and the church was built inside the fortress of Srirangapattanam. This was achieved through the mediation of the nephew, the prince nephew of Doddadevaraj Odayar, Kantirava Arasu. And in fact, when Doddadevaraj Odayar once wanted to build an ammunition center and he was trying to choose a place, the minister told him that that house belongs to the Roman sannyasi. He said that we should not disturb the Roman sannyasi, we shall try to build it elsewhere. So such an amount of respect that he had for the Roman sannyasi, for the Jesuit missionaries. And also in the annual letter of 1670 says that when some people came to complain against the Christians and against the missionaries, he rebuked them by saying that not to speak anything against the Roman sannyasis. His successor, Chikkadevaraj Odayar, was an enigmatic personality, and we have mixed views from the missionaries. But all the same, we have several instances of goodwill shown to the missionaries. And in fact, in the year 1684, when there was a rebellion against the king, against the taxation policy of Chikkadevaraj Odayar, we find two Jesuit missionaries heading 200 Christian soldiers going and dispersing the rebels against the king. And in fact, the governor of Satyamangalam honored these two missionaries because of the great help that they did for the king. So the kings were very helpful to the missionaries, but all the same, we find a lot of persecutions against the missionaries and the Christians because of the calumnies spread by the influential religious leaders. The missionaries were expelled from the capital in the year 1672, and the wars between Mysore and Madurai between the years 1681 to 90 affected the mission because several churches, presbyteries were destroyed, and also natural calamities also made the Christians to disperse, and that made the pastoral care very difficult for the Christians by the missionaries. Chinnami, who was the founder of the Mysore mission, also wrote books in Kannada, Catechism, Lives of the Saints, and also a course of apologetics were written by him. As I told, in the year 1685, the two present districts of Coimbatore and Salem, which were originally belonging to Madurai mission, were added to Mysore mission with 10,000 Christians. Now, the Christians are spoken highly by the missionaries. They are said to be fervent Christians, and they were regular in religious practices, and they were rigorous and meticulous in fasting, and the Christians were scrupulous in their fidelity to the commandments and unwavering faith they showed during the persecutions. And the Christians were of ethnically mixed type. In Srirangapatna, we find mostly Christians from high classes, but in other mission stations, other residences away from Srirangapatna, we have mixed Christians emerging mainly from the lower section of the society. The mission in the 18th century was not very bright for Mysore mission, because already from the end of the 17th century, persecutions by Chikkadevaraja Odayar really affected the Christian communities. Therefore, we find a sharp decline in the number of Christians, and especially the capital was unsafe for the Christians and the missionaries to live. Therefore, the missionaries shift the headquarters to Arsinakere, where today we have the shrine of the Jesuit missionary Antonio Maria Plate, who was the most famous missionary in the beginning of the 18th century. He, in a way, brought a revival to the Christian communities, and new Christian centers emerged in the 18th century, places like Gardenahalli, Magge, Hasan, Arsinakere, Anekal, etc. I don't have to tell you where these places are, because you are already aware of these places. And a Christian community also emerged in Bangalore from the year 1730 onwards. And in 1711, we have the first martyr, Jesuit martyr, Manuel de Cunha, who in the kingdom of Kangondi was martyred in the year 1711, because already from 1668 onwards, we find a Christian community emerging in the Kangondi kingdom. And in the year 1670, it became a residence. Therefore, Manuel de Cunha went to Kangondi in order to build a church, but there he had a dispute with the Haridasas, and later several of them came and attacked him brutally. He was attacked. Because of the injuries, he died 18 days later on June 1st, 1711. His process of canonization is going on, which you all are aware. In the 18th century, the mission also was troubled by the Malabar Rites controversy. I suppose you already know what is a Malabar Rites controversy. Once again, the method of Robert de Nobili was dug up and it was criticized, and this really affected the mission of Mysore also. And in the year 1744, Rome ordered special missionaries also for the untouchables, to get conversions among the untouchables. In the second half of the 18th century, we don't find a very bright situation for the Mysore mission. We know that in the year 1759, Portugal suppressed the Society of Jesus, and because of that, the Viceroy of Goa ordered all the Jesuits to come to Goa, and he wanted to deport them. But the King of Mysore was so pleased with the Jesuit missionaries, he in fact sent a delegation to Goa asking the Viceroy and also the Archbishop of Goa not to expel the missionaries from the Mysore kingdom, but the Viceroy was very adamant. And the general suppression of 1773 was a great blow to Mysore mission, which at the time had nearly 25,000 Christians, and the pastoral care was completely neglected. Then later the mission was entrusted to the MEP missionaries, and the MEPs, starting with Abbe Dubois, began to look after the mission already from 1792 onwards, but in a tangible manner in Srirangapatna from the beginning of the 19th century. This is a short description about the Mysore mission. If you want to know more about the Mysore mission, we have the book of Domenico Ferroli by name Jesuits in Mysore. I'm sure most of you must be familiar with this book. It gives a lot of information about the Jesuit Mysore mission, and also you must be familiar with the books of Father Antapa and also several other of his books. But we need to be little careful with the book of Ferroli and Father Antapa, because a lot of errors are there. Several things that they mention do not correspond with the manuscripts. But to have a basic knowledge, these books are okay. And also in my book, Jesuit Letters and Mysore History, I have briefly mentioned about the Mysore mission of the Jesuits, but I have mentioned about the history of the mission only till the year 1704, because my period of research was only till there. And also, I have mentioned in a brief manner, the Mysore mission was not the focus of my research, but it is a history of the kingdom of Mysore. Some of you may ask, what about Christianity in Mysore before the arrival of the Jesuits? This article that I have written, a critical analysis of the claim of Christianity in Mysore before the 17th century, published in our Christi Jyoti journal, which I have given to your Vice Principal, Father Joshi. Probably you can get it from him, or if you contact me, I can also send it to you. The PDF format that analyzes various claims of Christianity in Mysore. That will be a very useful article. Now, I would like to conclude with the Jesuit letters. What are these Jesuit letters? These are the annual letters written by the missionaries from Mysore Mission, and they are mostly written in Portuguese. 70% of it are written in Portuguese. A few of them are also written in Italian and a few in Latin. Concerning Mysore mission, we have more than 1,000 pages of letters, which are very carefully preserved in the archives, Jesuit archives of Rome, for which we must be very grateful to them. But till today, they have not been translated, nor edited, or not published, except for the works of Domenico Ferroli, which I have mentioned, and also the works of Father Antapa. Therefore, if we translate them and publish them in India, they will be very useful for the history of Mysore. A sample of the letter is here. Why the Jesuit letters are historically valuable? Because the pre-18th century Mysore history is written only with the use of local sources, local literary sources and epigraphical sources. These sources have their origin from the king's court. Therefore, they will try to portray the king's policies and all the history of Mysore only in a positive light. Whereas the Jesuit letters are the only source that exists today which come from foreign hands. They try to look at the same events from another angle. And since the missionaries were very much associated with the Christian communities and several people, they look at the way these policies affected the people, and therefore we get altogether a different angle to the historical events. What type of information we find in the Jesuit letters? Mainly the mission work is related or narrated. The information about the Christian communities, the life of Christians, the life of missionaries, the ambience in which the mission flourished, etc. Apart from that, we have the socio-political situation of Mysore is described, the religious situation of Mysore, the religious setup of the society, the things that affected the Christian communities like wars, the policies of the kings, the laws, etc., and also the persecutions and the geographical situation, etc., all are mentioned in the Jesuit letters, because of which I consider that these letters are very useful. The most famous Mysore historian, Haivadana Rao, discredits the Jesuit letters, telling that these letters are useless for the history of Mysore. And he says that these are religiously biased materials. I, on the other hand, find it very useful. Therefore, I attempted to re-establish their historical values by collecting the historical information from the Jesuit letters, and I compared them with the local sources, and wherever the local sources lacked, the Jesuit sources complemented. So in this way, I attempted to re-establish the historical value of these Jesuit letters. To conclude, mission work in India is described purely as a conversion or a forced conversion or evangelization, etc. But that is not the only aspect of the mission work in India. The missionaries in India have greatly contributed to the development of culture, language, science, arts, social upliftment, architecture, journalism, archaeology, cartography, etc. These aspects have to be brought to light. The immense contribution that the Christian missionaries have made to Indian history is still lying buried in the ecclesiastical archives. So it is our duty to unearth the great contribution of the Christians and show that it is not only conversion, not only getting people to Christianity, but also it has various other dimensions. And I find the Jesuits have contributed a lot. For example, in Chota Nagpur, Constant Levens and his successors, and also present-day Father Stan Swami, his contribution have to be brought to light. In this way, we can create a new narrative to the mission history of India. Thank you very much.